black daughter made it through some hard times. Black mother, black daughter. We're here, standing at the shoreline, made it through some hard times. Black mother, black daughter.
Growing up as a black girl in Nova Scotia, my strongest memories are of black women. From them, I learned of the importance and interdependence of family, church, and community. When the century-old black community of Africville was destroyed and replaced by this Halifax Park, part of our heritage was stolen from us. But the true bond and spirit that was Africville, which was carried here by the black slaves, loyalists, and refugees, survives. My name is Sylvia Hamilton. I want you to meet black women I've known, mothers and daughters who have patiently fostered and nurtured the survival of our black culture and community. If anyone had told me, perhaps 25 years ago when I was in CGIT and when Mrs. Pearline Oliver was teaching me all of the things that she taught me, that I would be sitting here today on a panel with her, I probably would not have believed it. But I'm very, very proud and very pleased because she indeed was one of the role models of the women of the past.
When I was here Tuesday night, I made a statement that was given by the Honorable Joseph Howe. And I just want to take one moment and just go over that statement again. Where the Honorable Joseph Howe said, the province of Nova Scotia owes you people a debt of justice. Do you remember that I said that from the Honorable Joseph Howe? And I really believed it, you know, and I didn't think that we had really received the justice that we should have had. And then when I picked up my paper yesterday and saw that we have a black woman judge, I said, that's the first payment on that debt of justice. And it's not only the first payment, but it's payment with interest. And so we thank the Nova Scotia government for appointing Corrine Sparks to the bench in Nova Scotia. My heart just thrilled. So let's look at the woman, the black woman. We only have a few minutes to do this, so, you know, we can't do the impossible. It was so horrible to be a woman slave. You were property. You belonged to the master. You're just like a chair or a table. And when they say go, you go. When they say come, you come. Do this, you do this. They were all whipped for any infraction. And there was one black slave. She stole some ribbons from her mistress. And she received 39 lashes publicly for stealing the ribbons. Many of the towns, I guess, had a public whipping post.
Why didn't they run away?
Well, they were easily identified by marks on their faces and even the clothing that they were wearing. Well, how far could they get? Where could they go? And then, of course, the ads were put in the newspapers with all the descriptions with a big reward. Some of them committed suicide. The Black Loyalists arrived, the first group, in May 1783. Many of the Black Loyalist women were seamstress, many of them were cooks, but the average woman would have to do the work of a man.
Black Loyalists settled throughout Nova Scotia, in Digby, Annapolis, and Guysborough, but the largest group settled in Shelburne and nearby Birchtown. Pearline Oliver and I went there to see for ourselves where these Black Loyalists and slaves had lived. In Shelburne, at Ross Thompson House, we found little evidence that spoke of the lives of these settlers. Even at the Shelburne County Museum, the recovery of our black history had only just begun.
The white loyalists who came for the most part, were very influential white people in the United States. Judges and big businessmen. But the blacks who came had all been slaves. They didn't get the same amount of rations. They didn't get the tools. They didn't get the land. They were just as much to say, this is good enough. After all, you're free, you're here, and you're just our servants or our slaves, and you're not as good as we are. That was very evident.
Lydia Jackson's orchestra, slaved and served, slaved and starved, in this rough land, cold and hard. And water and rock were her God, and water and rock were her God. And Lydia Jackson, slave Madonna, had a master, Dr. Pullman, a son of Nova Scotia, gave a son to Lydia, gave a son to our Lydia, Lydia, gave a son to our Lydia, and when she came to him, oh Lord, with the news, he knew just what to do. I said he beat her till she was black and blue, and their poor soul deep down when you, and now I Lydia Jackson.
These a cappella singers call themselves For the Moment. They are storytellers who sing of the living spirit and survival of black women in Nova Scotia. Songs like Lydia Jackson expand our oral tradition and help us to reclaim our history. The group's leader is Delvina Bernard.
I've been so blessed to be able to have an opportunity to express something in me and in so many women who feel the same thing, and have an opportunity to stand up and say, look, hey, because we don't have opportunities to do that, to stand up and say, we're still standing here, and it's because of what all of these other women have done throughout the generations, from the time they've landed on the shores of Nova Scotia up till now, that I am able to physically stand here and sing and tell someone, this is what these women before me have done.
These were women like my mother, Marie Hamilton. When I look at my daughter, Shani, I hope her world will be a better place than it was for us. But because she is black and female, she will certainly face discrimination. So Shani needs the same sense of identity and self-worth that my mother gave me.
A lady was walking along, was during the Easter seasons, and she had a little boy who's about 6 years of age, and she was trying to get him off of the bicycle. So she looked up and she saw me approaching her, and she said, oh, she said, if you don't get off that bicycle, that lady's going to take you. And the little boy, he was white, and he looked up at me, and he seen I was different. And I assured the child, I said, no, dear, I'm not going to take you. And I said to her, she had, the main thing, she had a prayer book or a Bible clenched to her, you know. So I said, are you going to church? I said, well, if you're going to church, you better go back home. And if you went to church, you didn't hear the word of God. So there was so much discrimination. Now that little child, when he grew up, every time he would see someone, especially a black woman, he would be afraid of that child. So discrimination starts there in the home. As a child, living in Nova Scotia. We all played together, and we went to church together, and we had socialized together in the schools. But as I became older and went out into the workforce, I found out it was discrimination. I wanted to become a nurse, but I was unable to go into training because they would not take any black students at that time in Nova Scotia to enroll in the nursing profession. So I said, well, the next I would become a teacher. I wanted to do something for others. And all the schools were black teachers in the rural communities. My first teaching assignment was in North Preston. The children didn't have very much opportunity for learning. They were so anxious to learn. They wanted to learn, but they didn't have the opportunity. And the parents, some of them were illiterate also. My expectation was to help build the community. I worked with the church, and I worked with the children in the school.
As far back as I can remember, within the black community, outdoor baptisms were part of our religious and cultural heritage. Baptisms of both young and old have been public testimony to the strength of the African Baptist faith. In East Preston, the words spoken by Reverend Donald Scare echo more than 200 years of tradition.
Catherine D., do you repent of your sins and accept Christ Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior? Upon profession of your faith, I baptize you in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Hallelujah to God. I believe on the Son.
My mother took me to church from the time I was a small child. On this occasion, I went with Mum and her friend Laura Howe to the Women's Day service in North Preston.
If you didn't have a church, you didn't have any community.
No, community without a church, because I remember the community that I came from. Well, now my home is New Glasgow, but the community I came from, Africville. Of course, you all know the story of Africa. I've told it so many times that, and once the church was taken, it was no longer a community. It was just, because we looked through the church, we got it, you know, and you come on Sunday morning, you could hear that bell toll.
Church and
it was something. When that left, well, it was a part of us that left.
Yes, part of you, because the foundation to bring up your children in a certain way, and that's all of our,
that's all we had was our church. That's all we had was our church.
Yes, you take
that's
them years ago, well, you go back, let's go back to slavery.
Yeah, that's all we had.
After they finished slaving and working for the others, they all gathered and they stealed away to Jesus.
Stealing away, that's where that's
beautiful.
Each year, members of the Women's Institute of the African United Baptist Church meet on Women's Day to celebrate their faith and renew friendships.
Lord, I pray today for anyone that needs a lifeline. Lord, I just pray that the lifeline will be thrown out, Jesus. Lord, I personally was sick, but Jesus, you see fit to bring me back to my feet. I know that there is still healing in the power, Lord, and I know that there's salvation. Jesus, I just want to continue to praise you, Lord, and lift you up, because you're God and you're God all by yourself. Now, Lord, I just leave it all in your hands. And I pray today that everyone will be blessed in your name. Amen.
During this service, the oldest women in the congregation are recognized for their hard work and dedication.
And I looked those women, I think that so much is due to them because they are the ones that brought us where we are today. And I look at 87 years old. It's just wonderful. There's something to us that we should appreciate them and respect them and give them an honor what's due to them. And it's just beautiful today. I just felt like I could just go and hug everyone. It's just beautiful.
Within the black community, caring and nurturing go beyond the immediate family, especially where children are concerned. Mom's friend, Cleo Wiley, lives in Hammonds Plains. Over the years, she has welcomed many foster children into her home. Today, she greets Lavinia Harris, whom I've known since I was young. When she was a child, Lavinia drove an ox cart. Now, at 85 years, she drives her own car. I want these women to tell me something of their lives.
I raised about 22 foster children. And I enjoyed doing, my husband and I, we both. He loved children and I loved children. And there's so many lonely children out there that need a home. And it just came, I guess the good Lord just put it in my mind to care for them.
You sure look hungry, Bert.
When you play, you're bound to get hungry. Since I'm home, my kids had all grown up. It was so lonely and the house was so big and empty. And I like children around me, like a family. Always like someone around, someone to talk with, instead of just sitting there so quiet when there's no one here. So I just enjoy being with kids.
I lost my mother when I was 4 years old, so my dad brought myself and my brother up. Dad used to farm, and weekends we'll have to get the produce ready to take to the market, so we used to have a lot of peas to shell, so we used to set up Friday nights and shell the peas, 60 quarts of peas. So we'd have to take the ox and cart and go across the ferry boat. But an ox is easy to drive because all you have to have a whip and just hit him, and then he'd go that way and that way. And we pay, which they say stop when we got to the boat to get our tickets and go across, and it was easy because we learned that from a child up. And it was quite a ways to come. We'd have to come from Preston, that would be like 15 miles. And the city market was a booming place to make a living.
Beginning with the arrival of the black refugees in 1812, black people have sold produce, baskets, and wood at city markets to earn a living for their families. Edith Clayton is a descendant of these refugees. She and members of her family are the last of the black basket weavers in Nova Scotia. Edith wants her craft to survive, to be passed on. In her East Preston shop, her daughters and her friends gather to weave baskets and to share memories.
This is basket weaving, yeah. It's weaving with wood.
I had knowledge of Mrs. Clayton through my mother, and also I used to come and see Mrs. Clayton's granddaughter. So I used to see her sitting and making baskets, but I never went to her and say, well, I'd like to learn it, because I always thought that she was sort of strict, and at that time I was sort of giggly and wasn't all that serious, and I was sort of afraid to even ask Mr. Clayton to teach me.
My mother taught me how to make baskets when I was 8 years old, and I enjoyed it very much. My mother used to go to day's work, and then she was a midwife, and she worked at that for a number of years. She used to travel for miles and miles, all hours at night, all by herself. And I remember the morning that my mother died. She called me downstairs about 5 o'clock in the morning, and she asked me for a drink of water. So I put my arm underneath her head and lifted up, and she took 3 sips of water. And she looked around at me, and she said, Edith, she called me by name. She said, you have done all you could for me, and God is going to bless you. And I'll tell you, to this day, God has wonderfully blessed me. And if it hadn't been for the way that my mother had brought me up, I wouldn't have been able to accomplish the things that I did.
My mother, too, was like Mrs. Clayton's mother. Although she wasn't a midwife, but she did day's work. They called it day's work in those days because They went out and they cleaned other people's houses. Of course, when they come home, they had to do their own. And my mother was a widow woman, and she was left with 8 children. So therefore, you know, she had it very, very hard. Very, very hard. She brought us up with understanding that right was right and wrong was wrong, and that when we went out to life, those things always followed us. And I had a wonderful mother.
My mom raised 12 kids on her own. So, and I'm the youngest in the family, but even though I was the youngest, I still had to pull my load within the family, which was not easy for me, because the type of chores that had to be done was difficult, like cutting wood and all that hard work that I felt that there was no need for it. I didn't like being poor, so I was trying my best to get my education. I have been watching girls that were continuing their education by taking some type of training, going to vacation school or going to university. By watching them, I was encouraged to say, hey, look, I want the same thing. I mean, these girls are trying to make their life better and easier. So this is what I wanted. And I managed to get to university, went to Dalhousie. But they were the ones to give me the encouragement when it came to education. My mother, she gave me the strength and the initiative to carry on, because this is what she had, okay? My mother didn't have an education at all, okay? She only managed to get a grade 3.
My mother always said the older women worked hard to create a path for us, to make it easier for us to do what they could not. The Lewis family have been members of the community of Annapolis Royal since their ancestors arrived here as black loyalists in 1783. Doreen Lewis is a weaver and the owner of Studio Weffin. Until recently, Doreen was mayor of Annapolis Royal.
Myself, I never dreamt of being the mayor of Annapolis Royal. My brother gets a real trip out of coming home in the summer and saying, but you're the mayor. At the time I was growing up in Annapolis Royal, the dances were segregated, and segregation was very evident in the area. So Boy Out dreams were just on another plane altogether. They were real fantasies.
I didn't wear one, but anyway. While I was weaving, she was also interested.
When I first met Doreen Lewis, I was struck by her relationship with her mother and the strength of their family traditions.
I have responded to some people the fact that I learned weaving by osmosis.
She used to help me wind the bobbins and pass me the shuttles.
The loom was always in action as I was a kid growing up. Mother used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning so she could do her weaving without having us distracting her, and you just got used to the sound in the house.
Shake the crosses through?
Might as well.
It's not so easy to shake the crosses through.
Works well, except it sticks.
It certainly does.
One of the strongest threads in the fabric of the Lewis family is their loyalist ancestor, Rose Fortune.
The story of Rose Fortune was just part of growing up and being a Lewis in Annapolis Royal. Her picture was always in Fort Anne, and as long as I can remember, the story of Rose Fortune was part of our oral history for the family. Rose Fortune was my great-grandmother 5 times removed. She was noted for being the first female policewoman in North America, so it made her quite a colorful character in the town of Annapolis Royal. She started a cartage business with a wheelbarrow. She would have met the boats at any of the various slips and carried the baggage down to the hotels. The business became Lewis Transfer, and the trucking company continued on in my family. So it went from one wheelbarrow that went from across the street to across the nation, we could say. Knowing that you have somebody as a definite character and a strong character like Rose Fortune would have a very positive, or has had a very positive effect in my life, because it makes me feel that I'm not the first black woman to try and do something in my family.
In May 1987, Doreen ran for the provincial Liberal nomination in her riding.
We Nova Scotians have a strength. We have a strong sense of identity. We know who we are and we know where we're going. And it's not down the garden path where the Tories are trying to lead us.
This nomination further underlines Doreen's place alongside Rose Fortune in the oral history of the Lewis family.
It's a great pleasure to introduce to you the Liberal candidate for Annapolis West, Doreen Lewis.
Although she didn't win a seat in the 1988 provincial election, Doreen did set another landmark in the struggle for the rights of black people, a struggle my mother, in her graceful yet persistent way, has been a part of all her life.
We as black people are just as equal as anyone else. And I like to say to the younger people, although you may be angry, but by being angry will only stop you from going ahead. Because if you take all your energy in being angry, you're going to lose out.
Every summer, former residents of Africville gather at the park that was once their home. When I was young, Mom brought me to Africville. Now I bring Shani here to share in this renewal of family and community. Shani will soon have to join in the struggle we have all carried on. So she needs something to hold on to rest against. She needs to know her history and to be strong in the knowledge that she, like her mother and her grandmother, is bound to something larger than herself. I want her to know the women I've known and to be touched and moved by the example of their lives.